Hello there. I am so glad to be here with you. Yes, this is a great day to talk about how talking to yourself could be a good thing for your business. So, we all do it, right? We all talk to ourselves, and it could be a good thing, but is it always a good thing? Maybe, maybe not. You're going to talk about this during this exact 20 minutes, half an hour. We do it quick, right? We don't want to take too long. We don't want to go on and on. We want to get right to the point, get that really important information, and get on out there back to our businesses. So in this group, we're always talking about the ways to master yourself in order to master your business, right? So mastering the way you talk to yourself is a real key to the process. Let me know where you are watching from. I am, I got snow again out here. So if you're in 80 degrees and it's like beautifully sunny outside, could you please write to me about it? I would really like that. And even if it's on a replay, just hashtag replay, and let's hear about that beautiful weather. Another morning of snow here in Western Massachusetts, right? Okay, I'm just going to check the tech, make sure you guys can hear me and see me and all of that good stuff. And it looks like all is well. So I am back with you. Okay, so this is where we are. How talking to yourself is a good thing for your business, right? So have you ever noticed when you're trying to go really fast at a task or to do something that's super difficult, you talk to yourself. You start mouthing the words of the thing that you need to do, right? Well, studies show that talking to yourself can improve your concentration and task performance, right? And even help your brain to perform better. Just that simple act. So I want to tell you, yesterday I had to sign up for something and it was on a very complicated website. It was so complicated that I called a friend. Did you ever remember that game show years ago? Do you need to call a friend? I needed to call a friend. I could not find the buttons. I could not find the passcodes. I could all of that, right? And so when you are in that place, what happens? What happened for me was I started to read out loud. I started to talk to myself and say, okay, I see this. They say this. Can I find it? Right? I talked myself through the process. So when we're doing something really hard like that, where you know there's a lot of detail, if you get lost, it's a great thing to start talking your way through it as if there was a second person there, right? As if you were explaining it to somebody. So this is an excellent way to use self-talk, but this is not the crux of why we're here, because it goes way beyond the sort of self-coaching, right? Finding the buttons on a website like that goes way beyond that. The content of your self-talk matters, and the content of the talking to yourself that is done in the silence really matters. So you guys all already know, I feel certain, that positive self-talk makes for a better mood and a better outlook and a better attitude, and a negative talk makes for a worse mood. So that's not news, I wouldn't think, to any of you, because you're here to master yourselves, right? In order to master your business. So you've got this idea that if I can gain control over myself and move forward into a better me, into a more productive me, into a more focused me, then my business will get better. And that is exactly right. So thinking about the way that you talk to yourself with and without your actual mouth, right, is really important. So you may not actually, at this moment, be in control of what's going on between your ears. This sounds funny, doesn't it? But it's true. You may not be in control of what's going on between your ears unless you do some very, very specific things in order to take control. And I'm going to explain that to you, okay? So what I'm talking about is when we're little kids, our brain waves are in a certain state. And when we are in that state up until 6 or 7 years old, we're soaking up information. So we're really just learning how to survive, but we're in a modern world, right? So our brains take it in as if it's like run from the bear or don't run from the bear, whichever it is, and be able to take care of yourself in life-threatening situations. But the reality is we're in a modern world. So that doesn't always serve us. And so what we soak in has to do with what our parents say, what our teachers say, what our playmates say, and we soak it in as if it is reality. There's not a lot of filter for a small child on what is reality and what is not reality. And the human brain is actually built to soak all that in as if it were reality for the first 6 or 7 years, and then to write a subconscious program so that you got everything you need to go through life without dying, basically, right? Without having mortal threat. So that's what it's built for, right? So by the time you are 35 years old, most people around 35 years old, it's fully programmed. Okay, so you've got 95% of what you are thinking is actually just programs that are running. They're kind of subconscious, below the threshold of consciousness. Now, subconscious, there's a lot of baggage around this word, so just don't worry about it. If you want to call it unconscious, that's fine. The important thing is that you get that you may not be aware of what's happening between your ears, even what comes out of your mouth quite often, right? So you could be just doing things and just running that program. In fact, there is an incredible book that talks about how we are a series of habits, right? Most of the time we get up in the morning, we get off the same side of the bed, we go to the restroom, we go to get the coffee or the tea, we do this routine that is a routine. And we may or may not be conscious of that, right? Most of the time, we're not real conscious of it. We wake up somewhere around the kids screaming, or we wake up somewhere around reading something alarming in the newspaper, right? So these are the ways in which we've kind of incorporated these thoughts without a lot of thought about it on our part. So if you're early in your career, right? If you're 20 or 25 or 30 years old and something happens, you soak it in a really different way than when you're 40 or 45, right? So I want to tell you about one of the things that I was given early in my career that was about slowing down buying depending on an election cycle. So this really worked really well in the particular business that I was in. Just a couple of months before any major election, everybody stopped buying. And then once they knew who was going to be the new president, then they started buying again, right? Didn't seem to matter in terms of the buying cycle who won the election, just that the tension was over in the world. So I took this in, right? But many years later, I was in a different arena, and that did not apply at all. And it was my go-to, right? It was subconscious. It was unconscious. It was not a really well thought out thing of that moment because I knew it. It was real for me, right? Same thing with when you're very young and your parents say, you hear your parents and they say, I just can't catch a break, or if it's not one thing, it's another, right? These are the frameworks, right? These are the sort of unnoticed frameworks of the self-talk that is happening in our minds and coming out of our mouth. So the very first thing that we need to do is to become aware. Hey, say hi as you come in. Let me know you're here. I love to see who's here and get to talk with you, but the only way I know is if you make a comment. So say hello. So becoming aware is the first step in this process. So when I was in another career early on, I wanted to study business, and I was a sound designer. And so there wasn't like a way for me to just study business, right? I couldn't just quit my job and go to business school because that wasn't my reality at that moment. So I found a studio owner, a guy who was running a very good business. And I asked him if he would mentor me, right? If he would allow me to be a part of his business in a way where I got to learn how to run a business. And he said, sure. And I think it was maybe a few days later. Say hi as you're coming in. Love to hear from you. I love that you guys are here. Thank you. So just as a couple of days after he agreed to this, I saw him sit down the largest client that he had and dismiss him. And it still makes me swallow, right? Because I was like, what is happening, right? Because my programming up to that moment had always been, you got to take the job. It doesn't matter if it's beyond your reach. You should just take the job and then sort the rest out later. You never know. There's the scarcity, right? You never know when you'll get another chance to, where you get another client this big, like that, right? So I had been built on this sort of scarcity up to that moment. And when I saw Jeff sit this guy down and say, you're a great client of ours, but you need to find a new place to work with people in the next 2 weeks because we cannot have you as a client anymore. I was appalled. I was like, what is happening here? It was the smartest move I think I have ever seen. He said to me when I asked him, because I did afterwards, I was like, what did you just do? He said to me, that client was becoming so much of our business that the day he leaves, the day he decides that he needs more support than we can give, or he just decides he wants to work somewhere else, or he moves his operation to a different city, right? The day that he decides he doesn't want to work here anymore, I'm going to go out of business. And I cannot afford to have a client that is that much percentage of my business. Now, this was real news to me, but it was solidified into my mind, right? My mind soaked it in. So I was lucky. And I was aware of all of those thoughts that were behind that, right? Behind that moment. All of those thoughts to me that made it an aha when he did that, right? The aha was, oh, there'll be another client. There'll be another client. There'll be 6 more clients. In fact, I'll be happier when there are 6 small clients instead of this one big client. So these are the kinds of stories that you have to think through in your mind as you're living them. Raise your awareness, right? And you create the potential for writing a new program, just like that program was rewritten for me at that moment. I suddenly had a new perspective. And what became unconscious thinking for me was what that gentleman gave to me in his teaching, right? Was there's always another client. Nobody should have too tight a string on you. You are the captain of your destiny, right? All of those kinds of thoughts came out of that learning moment. So changing the program as an adult is really different than changing the program as a 5-year-old, right? If we're under that 6 or 7-year-old mark, not so hard, right? We just observe and the body writes the program. But once we become fully adult, then we have kind of super highways of thought, right? We have unconscious programming that we're not really in our awareness. So our thinking, in order to raise that awareness, needs to be slowed down, right? Because we can't be going on the super highway at 90 miles an hour and know what the exit signs say, right? Or what's in the exit area, right? So we got to slow down just a little bit and then examine, right? But how do you do that? Raising awareness of your thoughts, there is the simplest tool is just to start talking out loud. Speak aloud to yourself. It's okay, especially if you're in your own room by yourself, right? If you're in your own office and there's no Zoom on, then you can just start saying things out loud. And when you do, you will find the most strange things coming out of your mouth, right? Because they are usually things you are not quite cognizant of. So then, say we raise the awareness. What happens next? People say, whoa, I got to change that thinking. I think I'll try some affirmations. But the problem with affirmations, the problem that people experience with affirmations, I should say, is that affirmations, if you reach really far, it is really hard to get there. So a lot of times people go to a website or they pick up a book and they say, oh, I should affirm that I'm going to be a gazillionaire. Okay, I am a gazillionaire. I am a gazillionaire. But nothing in your body actually believes it, right? All that subconscious, unconscious programming is going, are you kidding? You can't let go of any of those clients. They own you. You can't possibly have a say in the way that you're interacting with people because they pay you, so they own you, right? So that's what's going on in that unconscious programming, if that's how you were programmed as a youngin', right? But the affirmation is saying the opposite. So there's a big problem there. It doesn't get anywhere. Sometimes people actually go more in the direction of the things that they do not want in their life when they start using affirmations, because the gap is too big, right? The gap is just too big. So I'm going to propose to you that you start with the conscious thoughts. Just start there, right? Start with that raised awareness. So when you think, oh, darn it, printers always break around me, or I'm terrible at filling out the website things, or every time I do it, it doesn't go through, right? These kinds of ways that we hear ourselves, we're a little aware of ourselves. We've determined who we are in relationship to the task. It's a great place to start. Because if you can soften your relationship with the negative, then you're going to be able to find an easy relationship with not reaching too far. So if that particular day, I have to tell you, I have always been a printer whiz. If anybody has a problem with a printer, they just call me into the room and the printer works, because printers love me, right? But there is no real tangible thing around that. I don't go and press a button. I don't do anything differently than everybody else, except that I know that printers love me, and there's never going to be a problem with tech around me, because, you know, tech is cool and it's really supportive. And even when there's a problem, it's not a big problem, and you've always got some backup, and so it's okay, right? So those are the kinds of programming that I have around that, right? So I don't have to reach very far on that. But if you were thinking to yourself, this always happens, then to soften that, to start to make that shift from this always happens to, oh, that's happening right now. Yeah, that does happen sometimes. Doesn't happen every time. In fact, I've seen some people who that never happens for, or very rarely happens for. Maybe there's a way for that to be true for me, right? So that's that softening. That's that reaching for something that's within reach, because the inside of your brain has a BS meter. I hate to tell you this, and I will tell you about the details of that science a little later, not in this talk, but that BS meter that goes on, if you don't get into the creative centers of the brain, your thoughts cannot become a part of your reality if they are sarcasm, if they are a lie. If your body says, that is not true, then it never makes it to light up the correct part of your brain. So that is really important to know, that as you talk to yourself, if you want to build productivity in your business, you can't go around saying you're in negative productivity. You cannot start with, I'm going to have 1,000,000% productivity today, right? You have to start with, things are getting better as I go. And I know that there is a productive version of me that's inside here. And I like productivity. It feels good to complete things, right? So that's that softening that I'm talking about. Now, I want to tell you partially why I'm talking to you about that softening process. So there is a psychologist and clinical director at a eating disorder place, right? And at the University of Pennsylvania, they did a study. And this gentleman said how he deals with people. He's dealing with people who are anorexic, who have severe eating disorders. And he said, the thing is that they don't have, same with us, an accurate representation in their mind that is true in the world. And that is the exact same for every single one of us when we think things like, it never works out for me, life is really hard for me, I don't know why it's so easy for other people, or even just simple things like, why don't the emails go through? Or why don't people return my calls in a timely manner, right? Or why is it so hard for me to make that sale? Or why are my sales volumes like, the volume isn't bad and I got a lot of sales, but they're all like real low dollar sales. What is wrong with me, right? Those kinds of thoughts are the things that stand in our way, even if we're unaware of them. So what this gentleman did is he stands the people with the eating disorder in front of a mirror, and he coaches them to use gentler language, to use more neutral language, right, as they evaluate themselves. So instead of saying my abdomen is disgusting and grotesque, he'll prompt them to say, my abdomen is round, my abdomen is big, it's bigger than I'd like it to be, right? You're working your way to a more productive, more open valve for yourself, right? And so what does it look like if you do this in your business? If anybody jump in there, even if it's on a replay, just hashtag replay and tell me, what is the starting point for you? What is that one thing that you say to yourself, I'm gonna change here? This is the thing that if I could talk myself in to a better business, right? How would I do that? Would it be that I want to focus on sales or focus on productivity or focus on organization? Whatever that is, it can even be just one word. Just stay right in the chat there and call it out. Not, of course, because it's nice to be in conversation, but also call it out, because as you raise your awareness, then you're able to access the thoughts and start to work with them, to soften them, to bring them into the place that you want them to be, instead of sort of unconsciously, randomly going in the wrong direction as you face toward your goal, right? So when I talk to people about this, they usually start with, I want a giant bank account, right? But it's a bit of a trigger, isn't it? It's very broad stroke. So start with the printer, start with the email, start with today's sales value, right? Don't get too crazy over, well, I have negative dollars and I need $1 million in order to be where I need to be. Okay. Small chunks. Start with the small things that you hear in your brain, because as you're able to access them, you will be able to work with them. I want to tell you a story actually about when I was a general manager of a corporation. We had multiple locations, and we would do these big sales, and each store would have to, by the end of the weekend, at the end of that day, they'd have to put in their sales volumes and report them to the main office. And so this all took a lot of time. It was retail and we were open late. And then, sales managers and store managers all had to stay after and count and make sure that everything was right and balance all the books and get everything exactly right before they made their report. So it was late and people were cranky, right? And there was always an expectation, right? We think that this sale is going to bring us this much money. Well, I can remember this time when there was this one store who we thought that their sales volume for that particular sale, it was just a 2-day sale or something, was supposed to be $125,000. And their books came in at 80,000. And I will tell you that there was a little bit of wide-eyedness, like what is happening, right? But what happened next, right? The next day, everybody goes home. We don't need to, we just report on that night. We don't get to judge. We just report. And then the next day, we didn't evaluate it either. We didn't say what went wrong. How could that happen, right? There was no, you should have done it differently, right? That next day was immediately brainstorming time. Okay, this is where we are, right? In the example I gave earlier with the doctor working with the anorexic patients, this is how big my belly is. That is where it is. For you in your business, this is where you are. So now it's time, without judgment, to move to that next piece without judgment and start talking to yourself differently about what's next. Instead of evaluating what's wrong and how it went bad, shift directly to, okay, this is where I am and this is where I'm going, and I'm going to slowly walk myself there in my thinking. So what are you going to do? Are you going to make your printer work? Write it in there. Are you going to grow your client base? Are you going to add new employees? Sometimes when you try these things, you do miss the mark, right? In fact, along the way, you're going to miss the mark. If you're trying for things, then you're definitely going to miss, because it's better to reach for something and not quite get there than to not reach, right? So as you get there, soften the negative, make it less important, and accentuate the positive in your thinking and in your speaking, in the way that you relate to other people, but most importantly, in the things that you say to yourself, right? Study after study after study throughout the 90s, the 2000s, and beyond have made the correlation between positive self-talk and visualization, cognitive mechanisms, they're called when you read the studies, right? And increased productivity at work. So if you're depressed, if you're going through a hard time, all of those kinds of things, make no mistake, unless you do the inner work to change that self-talk, your business is going to suffer, right? So you've got to do the work along the way. Start talking to yourself out loud, if possible, to raise that awareness and change the kind of undercurrent of your thinking. Now, I go into a lot more detail on how the brain deals with you as an entity in my free training on building unstoppable confidence, which I am making available to you. And I'm going to put it in here in this chat, and hopefully it will go straight through. If Facebook is with us, we never know, but no, it's not going to. But I will put that right in the chat there in the comments. And it's really important that you take a look at it, right? Because I really go into what's happening in your brain and how you can shift things like confidence issues, self-esteem issues, right? All of these things that are kind of us judging us. So that is for you, free, no worries, so easy. And I hope that you found some value in this. If you did, please feel free to comment. Feel free to invite people that you think will be able to use these trainings in the business, right? In their business. I look forward to seeing you next time. Bye-bye.